She is a prostitute and a murderer, yet she insisted on giving birth to the child of her client. In the end, she embarked on a journey to sell her own son with 2 human traffickers. Yet, who could have known that behind this absurdity lies an unspeakable social reality? The woman's name is Suing. As a child, she was an abandoned baby taken in by Madam. The Madam adopted these girls with the intention of exploiting them for sex trade once they came of age. In this environment, Suing met a crime boss and bore him a son. Early in her pregnancy, the crime boss's wife sent her goons to threaten Suing into aborting the child. But stubborn by nature, Suing not only refused to comply, but later, driven by years of abuse from the boss, killed him in a fit of rage. To spare her child from being branded a murderer's son at birth, Suing brought the baby to a church-affiliated welfare box on a rainy night, leaving only a note hoping he'd be adopted by a suitable family. But at the last moment, Suing found herself agonizing over the decision. Ultimately, she placed the baby on the ground instead of inside the welfare box. Unbeknownst to her, every move she made was being monitored by 2 female officers. After Suing left, Officer Lee Jieun, played by Lee Jieun, placed the baby into the incubator. But Lee Jieun's act was driven not just by compassion. She had an ulterior motive. The welfare center had been reported for staff secretly selling fostered infants. The 2 officers had been staking out the place for 6 months. By placing the baby in the drop box, Lee Jieun aimed to lure traffickers to take the child, enabling their arrest during the transaction. But things quickly changed. So-young, who was about to leave the city, suddenly regretted her decision. However, when she returned to the welfare center, when she tried to retrieve the child, it was gone. So-young was so frantic that she immediately prepared to call the police. Then, Dong-so, a staff member at the welfare center, stopped her. Dong-so has been an orphan since childhood and grew up in the welfare center. It was he who was selling abandoned babies with his accomplice, Sang-hyun. Dong-so didn't expect So-young to return, and seeing her about to call the police, he could only reveal himself and quickly contact Sang-hyun. Sang-hyun runs a laundry shop, but business is very poor. The once happy family of 3 was tragically torn apart. Sang-hyun also has a daughter, but there's no affection between them. To save his family, Sang-hyun took a desperate risk and joined Dong-so in human trafficking. Facing So-young, who came to find her child, Sang-hyun and Dong-so had their own justification. But So-young quickly saw through their hypocrisy in her view. Dong-so and Sang-hyun had no right to decide for these children, until Dong-so and Sang-hyun proposed that after selling the child, they would give So-young 10 million won, and the 3 finally agreed. This puzzled the 2 policewomen who were staking out. Who is that? But just as the 3 were about to leave to find a buyer, Sang-hyun encountered a loan shark. It turned out he owed them 40 million won, and to repay it quickly, Sang-hyun became even more desperate. He and Dong-so took So-young and the child in a rundown van. They soon embarked on a journey to find a buyer, while the 2 policewomen quietly followed them. 2 hours later, they found a buyer, but the agreed price of 20 million won was suddenly slashed to 4 million with installment payments demanded. The buyer claimed the baby was unattractive, particularly criticizing his eyebrows for being too sparse. The buyer's nitpicking infuriated So-young. After all, this was her own flesh and blood. The deal fell through completely. Naturally, Detective Lee Jieun and her partner couldn't execute the arrest. Left with no choice, the trio continued searching for another buyer. Meanwhile, police finally discovered So-young's crime scene. The veteran detective had years of experience, yet the pool of blood on the floor still made him nauseous. He noticed a woman's lipstick stain on the wine glass, clearly left by So-young. By this time, So-young had returned to the orphanage with Sang. Having grown up there, Dong-soo received familial warmth from the children. So-young felt a pang of emotion. She'd briefly considered leaving her baby at the orphanage, but now she wanted to personally find him a loving home. Just then, the 2 detectives were covertly installing a tracker on the van, when So-young returned unexpectedly to change the baby's diaper. Though outwardly detached when alone with her child, her maternal instincts unconsciously surfaced. The detective was baffled why So-young insisted on selling the baby she clearly cared for. Moments later, So-young argued with Dong-soo. When she pressed to sell the baby quickly, Dong-soo mocked her, saying this would free her from misery sooner. Soo-young retorted that he had no idea how hard it is to be a single mother. Dong-soo was at a loss for words. Even so, that doesn't make abandoning your own child right. Seeing this, Sang-hyun quickly stepped in to mediate, telling So-young about Dong-soo's background. Dong-soo was abandoned at an orphanage by his mother as a child, much like what might happen to So-young's son. That's why seeing So-young sell her child triggered him, reliving his trauma and projecting his resentment toward his mother onto So-young. That's why he lashed out at her. So-young felt embarrassed too. The next morning, a light rain began to fall. So-young watched raindrops hit her hands, lamenting how stained she was with sin, wishing a downpour could wash away all the filth and purify her. But even as the rain continued, she still felt utterly unclean. Dong-soo caught her underlying meaning. He realized she was grieving her troubled life. 5:30 Simon Diakyang, that one. MHM, clad in these cool-toned wings, the two fell silent. For a long while, neither brought up their earlier argument. Meanwhile, two female officers staked out nearby, still monitoring the house, when suddenly a phone rang in a pocket. Soo-jin confirmed So-young was the murderer, but she and her partner had been on this stakeout for 6 months, desperate to crack this child trafficking case. So they planned to solve it quickly before homicide detectives took over the murder case. Soo-jin then devised a sting operation, recruit a couple to pose as buyers. Under Soo-jin's direction, they quickly leaked an offer to buy a baby for 20 million won. So-young and the two men took the bait immediately. But then an unexpected issue arose. Their van was meant for only 4 people. Yet there was now a fit. It turned out that during their earlier stop at the orphanage, an orphan named Hae had secretly climbed into the vehicle. Hae had aged out of adoption eligibility and faced growing up solely in the institution, yearning for family warmth. In a glimpse of the outside world, he'd mustered the courage to sneak into the van. Initially, Sang-hyun resisted taking an extra person. After all, they were trafficking a child. But realizing Hae had been tailing them and overheard their in-car discussions, he reluctantly brought Hae along to prevent information leaks. Meanwhile, 2 policewomen trained a couple posing as buyers, believing their plan was foolproof. Yet the actual meeting exposed glaring flaws. Though both sides saw through each other's disguises, they misinterpreted the situation as rival traffickers seeking to flip the baby overseas for profit. Earn the difference by doing so. For Dong-soo and Sang-hyun, any buyer would suffice if they got paid. But So-young insisted on finding a trustworthy family. She preferred to find a loving home for her children where she could have peace of mind. Thus the sting operation failed, and the group resumed their search for buyers. En route, they stopped at an automatic car wash. There, mischievous Hae thought it'd be fun to lower a window, allowing water to gush into the vehicle through the opening. Yet all 3 adults instinctively shielded the baby first. Though drenched by Hae's prank, they radiated genuine happiness and laughter. The mutual distrust had melted into something resembling family bonds. They finally opened their hearts, and the barriers between them gradually faded away. Sang-hyun was the first to confess, admitting he'd been using a fake name. So-young also confessed that she too had been using a false identity. Just then, warm sunlight streamed through the car window, falling on So-young as it dispelled the gloom in her heart. Meanwhile, the 2 detectives grew desperate as the child sale remained stalled. Detective Soo-jin realized So-young's status as a murderer could be leveraged. You see, you're waiting for me again. You're still here. It's not that hard now. So she approached So-young directly, offering a reduced sentence in exchange for wearing a wire. This would let police monitor Dong-soo and Sang-hyun's movements. With no other choice, So-young agreed, and returned to their hideout wearing the device. Soo-jin was puzzled by So-young's immediate compliance, until she put on the headphones and heard their daily interactions. At night, when the baby cried for formula, Sang-hyun had even drawn up a night shift schedule for feedings. That's when Soo-jin understood. So-young wore the wire, not for a reduced sentence, but to show them. These supposed criminals possessed the tenderest warmth. When the baby developed a fever later, panic ensued. But without a birth certificate, hospital treatment risked exposure. Yet for the baby's sake, they risked visiting a nearby hospital. Fortunately, the doctor diagnosed a common cold, allowing their anxious hearts to settle. Hearing this, Detective Soo-jin was deeply moved. As a mother who abandoned her child, So-young may have her own unspoken hardships. The abandoned child is pitiful, but So-young made such a choice, perhaps out of sheer helplessness. No one can truly grasp her inability to let go and the heartache of having to give up. But Soo-jin didn't see it that way. Everyone's looking up information. Oh, Mom, you're listening too? That night, after So-young put the child to sleep, she received a text from Soo-jin. So-young rushed to the rooftop to meet them. The man didn't understand why So-young killed the child's biological father. So-young finally expressed her helplessness. So-young didn't want to answer, nor did she want to recall that unbearable past. But Soo-jin still voiced the doubt in her heart. But to keep the child, the two argued about this. One insisted that giving birth entails responsibility, while the other believed abortion was a greater sin. Two women from vastly different worlds. One a police officer, the other a prisoner. Each held her own view, who was right and who was wrong. Perhaps only those who've lived through it can truly understand. Meanwhile, another woman became entangled in the situation. It was the deceased gang leader's wife, Black's sister-in-law. After learning of her husband's death, Black's sister-in-law wanted to buy So-young's child. Because it was her husband's only child, she wanted to raise the baby herself. And this was what So-young dreaded most. After all, that man had led the underworld, and she feared the child would grow up under Black's sister-in-law's influence and follow the same path in the future. But Black's sister-in-law didn't give up. She even sent her men to buy the child for a high price. Coincidentally, Sang-hyun's creditor was the deceased gang leader. The creditor's men found Sang-hyun and stated, "Hand over the baby, and your debt will be cleared." Sang-hyun is torn. He's drowning in debt. Yet giving up the child would settle his arrears and bring peace. But he knows all too well that if he hands over the child, the baby will grow up in the underworld. The crime boss's widow wants to raise this child, likely to groom him as heir to her husband's criminal empire. By now, they've grown surprisingly close. So-young finally reveals her secret. She's a murderer. She confesses the crime boss's widow is hunting her down. In the end, Sang-hyun won't betray his conscience. He refuses to pay off debts by selling the child to criminals. Instead, he helps find a proper adoptive family. But when they depart next morning, Dong-soo discovers the tracker detective Lee Jieun planted. The outdated device doesn't raise police suspicion. They blame the crime boss's widow. Dong-soo moves the tracker to a neighboring car. Lee Jieun and her partner discover this too late. But So-young wears a wire, and she's cooperating with police, so she reports their location. On the subway to the meetup, Sang-hyun asks So-young, "After leaving your baby, did you ever want him back?" What a beautiful song. His question carries unexpected warmth. Through their journey, So-young now trusts them enough to be vulnerable. Hours later, they meet new prospective parents, a couple whose child recently passed away. The infant hasn't even been weaned yet. Overwhelmed with emotion after seeing So-young's baby, she immediately approached, cradled the child, and began breastfeeding. Watching nearby, her husband saw his wife's heart, hollowed by child loss, gradually filling, and offered a relieved smile. The transaction seemed destined for success. But these childless parents, love came with intense possessiveness. They demanded a harsh condition. They'd care for the child as their own. But So-young must vanish completely from the child's life, severing all ties permanently. So-young hesitated. The couple gave her one day to decide. That day, the five explored the city together. Riding the Ferris wheel, Sang-hyun shared a cabin with Hae-in, resembling a true father and son. Hae-in, afraid of heights, dared not look out. Sang-hyun covered the boy's eyes with a father's tenderness, soothing him with gentle head strokes. Meanwhile, So-young, Dong-soo, and the baby formed another cabin trio. Dong-soo instinctively embraced a paternal role despite no blood relation. His slightly awkward devotion struck So-young as unexpectedly romantic. So-young reflected, life resembles a Ferris wheel, full of rises and falls, with her currently at life's lowest point. Tears flowed as she anticipated imminent arrest for murder charges. Instead of wiping her tears, Dong-soo gently shielded her eyes, murmuring, "Out of sight, out of mind makes things less frightening." Opening up, Dong-soo confessed meeting So-young, helped unravel his emotional knots. He'd long harbored resentment toward his abandoning mother. Witnessing So-young's helpless outburst at her child, Dong-soo began to understand his own mother. Perhaps his mother had no choice but to abandon him. Dong-soo comforted So-young with his story, but guilt still consumed her. She knew no depth of love could justify this act of abandonment. The policewomen, overhearing this, were deeply moved. They realized in their rush for quick results, they'd become the ones hoping the baby would be sold fastest, making them feel like the real criminals. Recognizing their mistake, they decided to help So-young. They discovered So-young was underage, and her crime was involuntary manslaughter. If she surrendered, she'd serve at most 3 years and could reclaim her child. No need to sell the baby at all. So-young vanished without warning. Sang-hyun grew suspicious, guessing she turned herself in, fearing she'd expose him and Dong-soo to reduce her sentence. "Look at that, what we do now? Where did you come from?" As Sang-hyun feared, So-young surrendered and was arrested. The buyers received probation. Dong-soo was arrested for trafficking, while Sang-hyun holding the baby. encountered Black's sister's enforcers. He refused to surrender the child and passed it to Dong-soo. Next day's news reported Black's sister's men dead in the underground marketplace. Watching live, Sang Hyun panicked. Had he killed them? Time passed. 2.5 years later, Soo-ing was released 6 months early due to good behavior in prison. During this period, Seo-jin had been caring for her child. After her release, Soo-ing found a job. She was ready to reunite with her son. In an old van nearby, someone was secretly watching her. The profile photo hanging in the van revealed that the occupant was Sang Hyun, still on the run.